Good evening, boys and girls. Tonight's Shabbat story is Grandma Rosie's Magic by Linda Leibowitz Marshall and illustrated by Og Jakowski. Excuse me for mispronunciation. With a needle and a thread and a piece of cloth, Grandma Rose could make magic. Rosie likes to sew too. Just coincidence. Grandma Rose made dresses for her daughter and slacks for her sons. She made blankets for babies, dolls for grandchildren, and curtains and quilts for friends and neighbors. One day, Grandma Rose hemmed a skirt for Mrs. Feldman. "The hem is perfect," said Mrs. Feldman, "and goodness, my skirt has beautiful new pink and red buttons shaped like roses." "Must be magic," answered Grandma Rose, and she put the money Mrs. Feldman paid her for the jar in her jar on the kitchen shelf. The next week, Mrs. Cooper visited Grandma Rose. "My daughter's getting married," she said. "I would like you to make her a beautiful blue tablecloth." When the tablecloth was done, Mrs. Cooper came to pick it up. Grandma Rose put the money in that Mrs. Cooper paid her and put it in her jar. "The tablecloth is gorgeous," said Mrs. Cooper, "and goodness me, there are also 12 beautiful napkins with borders of blue and gold." "Must be magic," answered Grandma Rose. Grandma Rose sewed a hat for Mrs. Siegel, a scarf for Mrs. Rappaport, a shirt for Mr. Cohen. Whenever Grandma Rose sewed, something magical happened, and every day she sewed, and every day she saved. "I'm saving my dollars and dimes and nickels and quarters and even my pennies," Grandma Rose told her granddaughter, Julia. "I'm going to buy the most beautiful set of dishes I've ever seen." "What do they look like?" Julia asked as Grandma Rose pinned the sleeves of her new dress. "They look just like the dishes my grandmother used on Shabbos when I was a child," answered Grandma Rose. "Around the edge of every plate and bowl and teacup is a beautiful border of blue and gold, and in the middle of each are the pink and red roses." "Where did you find them?" asked Julia as Grandma Rose began to sew. "Downtown," she answered, "in the big department store." The money in Grandpa Rose's jar grew and grew, and when it was full, she counted her dimes, nickels, and quarters, and even her pennies, and she had $200. Grandma Rose went to the bank. "I worked very hard," she told the bank teller, "and now I would like to change my dimes, nickels, and quarters, and even my pennies into dollars. I'm going downtown and buy the most beautiful dishes with pink and red roses, just like the ones my grandmother had." "Don't you remember me?" the teller asked. "You made my wonderful wedding dress." And to my surprise, there was also a lacy white wedding veil. "Must have been magic," said Grandma Rose. "It was," said the teller, and she counted out the coins and gave back dollars to Grandma Rose. But when Grandma Rose got to the store, there was not a single dish with blue and gold trim or on the border and the pink and red roses in the middle. Grandma Rose was very sad. She had $200 in her pocket, but she could not set her table with dollar bills. "I don't have my new dishes," she thought, "but I can fill my old dishes with good food." So Grandma Rose used all of her money to buy roast beef and turkey, poppy seed rolls, chocolate cookies, and fresh fruit. And when she got home, her son and daughter, their wives and husbands, and all of their grandchildren were there. Mrs. Feldman, Mrs. Cooper were there. Mrs. Siegel and Mr. Cohen and Mrs. Rappaport were there. Even the bank teller was there. "Surprise!" they shouted, and in their hands each person held a plate or a bowl or a teapot with blue and gold trim and pink and red roses in the middle. "Thank you," said Mrs. Cooper as she set a dinner table plate on Grandma Rose's dining room table, "for surprising me with the baby blanket when my son was born." "Thank you," said Mrs. Feldman as she set a teacup next to the dinner plate, "for surprising me with curtains for my new home." "Thank you, thank you, thank you," said Mrs. Rappaport, Mr. Cohen, and the bank teller, and all of the people in the living room, "for making the shirts and the skirts and the blankets and the bedspreads, and most of all, for bringing us together." And as Grandma Rose watched her friends and family fill the beautiful new dishes with roast beef and turkey, fancy breads and fruits, she remembered every shirt, skirt, and tablecloth and curtain that she had made, and she remembered all the meals that she had shared with her own grandparents long ago. Now she said, "Let's eat!" "Look at all this food," said Mr. Cohen. "How did you know we would all be here?" "Must be magic," answered Grandma Rose. The end. Shabbat shalom, my friends.